Welcome to episode 61 of the Princeton Podcast, produced by the podcast production team at HG Media, providing audio and video production services here in Princeton since 1999. In this episode, our podcast host, Mayor Mark Freda, welcomes Derek Bridger, Princeton Zoning Officer, to discuss the important and timely topic of accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. Mark and Derek explore how ADUs offer new housing options in Princeton, supporting affordability, aging in place, and the missing middle in our fully developed housing market. Derek describes some of the positive impacts ADUs can have, such as providing rental income and broadening the town's housing diversity, while also addressing residents' concerns about neighborhood density, construction impacts, and zoning complexities. They dive into regulations surrounding ADU size, setbacks, parking, and stormwater management, and how Princeton's evolving ordinances are adapting to the needs of the community. Whether you're a homeowner curious about adding an ADU or just interested in Princeton's growth strategies, this conversation offers valuable insights into one of our town's most talked about topics. So without any further introduction, let's join our host, Mark Freda, and his guest, Derek Bridger, for episode 61 of the Princeton Podcast.
Derek, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure, Mark.
All right, first question. What is an ADU?
Right, an ADU, I'm going to kind of go off the definition here. It's a group of interrelated rooms that constitutes an entirely self-contained portion of a principal residence or a one-family dwelling, or it could be located in an accessory building on the lot as a principal dwelling. Contains housekeeping for one family, doesn't have any cooking or food prep facilities or sanitary facilities or enclosed space in common with any other part of the building in which it's located. So it's got to be, they could be either separate in their own building on a lot, or they could be part of the main house. They could be in the basement. They could be in, a wing of the house. But it's got to be separate as far as the kitchen and bath and housekeeping stuff. But you could have common air conditioners and heating equipment, that kind of, or if it's in the same house, you could have the garage, could be part of it too. But once it becomes separate, the garage becomes an issue because they can be sold separately. So it would contribute towards the size of the ADU, which we'll get to that size a little bit later on.
Yeah. All right. So when did Princeton put the ordinance allowing the ADUs in place? How long has that been around?
It's been in since June of 2020, 2020. Both communities had similar ordinances before, but I would say they were more restrictive. The township had what was called a flat ordinance, where you could have a flat inside of a house, but it had to be contained in the principal dwelling, so it couldn't be a detached dwelling. The borough had secondary residences, which required a little bit larger lot area, like 25% larger lot area than the prescribed lot area for a zone, and it only allowed 2 habitable rooms, which is basically a living room or a bedroom. Kitchen's not a habitable room, laundry rooms aren't habitable, hallways, that type of stuff. So they kind of opened it up, and they've been fairly popular. There's been quite a few applications.
Yeah. So what were the hoped for outcomes by putting this ordinance in place?
I think there was a couple of, objectives. One was to just provide people with more housing sources. I think to try to hit the missing middle, which is a, elusive thing in a place like Princeton where your land values are so high. And it also allows people to age in place so they could get the rental income from that apartment. They could sell the apartment. They could just get money to stay in town and pay their taxes and living expenses. So it does create kind of a middle space of properties in town. Just, the prices continue to go up here, there.
Yes, they do.
So these are, I've seen them go as high as $800,000-$900,000, but I think between 5 and 8, and there's just not a lot of other stuff in that range. Because anything that's $700,000, $800,000, $900,000 with a small house is going to be torn down and redeveloped into a larger house.
Probably. Yeah. Okay.
The maximum is the minimum, as far as the size of houses.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy what's been happening.
Yeah.
So Do you have an idea of about how many ADUs have been constructed since this ordinance came into place?
It's been around 40. Some have been in houses, some are outside. Some were, I would say 5 or 6 were older ones that had been approved, in the old code, and they were kind of grandfathered. So,
right.
Some haven't been built. Some people, they think it's a great idea, but, it still adds up. A kitchen is $50,000, $60,000, $70,000. Your bathrooms, and you have to have certain finishes. It's just, you can't cheap it out. Or you can, but it's just, you're spending money on an asset like that. It just costs a lot of money to build anywhere, especially, with the environmental impacts of like stormwater control and that type of stuff. So it adds up, but.
Yeah, well, a lot goes into it.
Yeah.
Okay, so here, I want to spend a little time on this question because, and I know in your answer to the first question, you kind of hit on this, but I really want to narrow in on it because people keep asking me this, and I hope I answer it correctly. I'm going to find out, depending what you say. So can an ADU be connected to an existing home, or does it need to be separated from the existing home?
It can be connected to the existing home. There's some rules. You can't have a door of an ADU that faces the same way that the door of the main house does. So typically the principal dwelling door will face the main street. So the ADU door would have to face a different direction because they didn't want 2 doors facing the front.
So the main entrance of the ADU, doorway should be like on the side.
Yeah, exactly. So they can be part of the house. They could be in a basement. I've seen people, cordon off a portion of the house with a separate entrance to put them in there. And then there can be separate structures on a lot. I mean, the minimum setback is 5 feet for a 1.5 story, 20-foot high ADU.
Yeah.
The majority seem to be separate, detached units.
Right. Okay. So it can be either one. And it just depends. Obviously, they work those details out when they come to visit you, probably.
Yeah. And I mean, if they're in the basement, then that you got to have egress windows and that type of stuff. So it's a little bit of work involved, but that's a cheaper alternative for somebody who wants to, get some income.
Right.
Is to put it in your house, but then there's less privacy and some.
Yeah, you have somebody else living in
different,
the house.
effects than a detached one.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's an important comment on the windows, right? Because most basements have tiny little windows, and nobody's getting out through those windows.
Right.
So,
in your history in the fire department, it's an important thing. You got to get people out of a basement in the event of a fire.
All right. So here's another one that I get asked a lot. How big can an ADU be, or what decides how big an ADU can be?
Okay, so there's the basic size is the maximum size is 800 square feet, or 25% of the floor area ratio of the house. So if your house is 5,000 square feet, you could have a 1,250 square foot ADU.
Okay,
but it's limited to 3 habitable rooms, which the common design we see is there'll be like a great room on the first floor with a kitchen and a dining room area and a living room area. We consider that living room area 1 habitable room, and then they could have 2 bedrooms in addition to that. That would be their 3 habitable rooms.
Okay.
But a kitchen's not a habitable room, as I mentioned earlier.
Sure.
Hallways are not. Laundry rooms are not. So those are the parameters, but you can get some pretty big, great rooms. And, I think we haven't seen many, over 1,000 square feet. Most of them are 800. It seems to be the sweet spot. And it just has to fit into the zoning of the property too. So if your floor area ratio, which is basically the measurement of a house, the area of a house, that's a percentage of the lot area. So if your FAR is 25% and you're in like a 10,000 square foot lot, you have 2,500 square foot of building on your property. So the ADU still has to fit into that parameter. So, if you have a house that's already at 25%, then
you've maxed out.
You can't get an ADU.
Okay.
So,
right. So that's an important. So it's not like every house is eligible. It's not like every property with a house is eligible to add an ADU.
Right. I mean, in that case, you could do it. You'd have to do it inside
Interior.
the house, but you can't add another one. And so that's the issue there.
Okay. Yeah. So people really should make sure they investigate enough beforehand before they say, oh, geez, I want to add an ADU on my property. Sounds like an informal discussion with your office makes sense.
Yeah, and we got a lot of professionals in town, architects who kind of specialize in this, and they're very knowledgeable. So, I mean, they either go to them or they come to me, or the architect will come see me. But we get a lot of inquiries. It's been a, pretty active program since it was opened up.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I guess the intent, as you had mentioned, the intent for somebody that owns a property in town now and needs income to help cover taxes or whatever expenses to stay in town, that's a great tool to use.
It is.
Yeah.
And, my daughter lives in California, so I'm out there quite a bit in Los Angeles, and the ADUs are everywhere out there, and then they have similar situations. They have a worse housing crisis than we do because it's even more expensive. But, you get used to them. I mean, I think people were a little shocked anytime anything changes. They're concerned, but I think they're accepted out there, and it's a nice niche housing tool to address the town's need for housing. We have a shortage. We're getting a lot of affordable housing with market rate housing too, but that's all. It's not cheap housing. The market rate housing is thousands of dollars a month.
It's expensive.
This kind of fills a gap in the housing. Affordability of the town. So.
Yeah. And I think it's my personal perspective is that it works better when it's someone that says, I'm going to stay in my house, or I'm going to move into the ADU I build and rent out my house, as opposed to someone who buys a property, develops it, and says, oh, I'm now building a newer, bigger house and an ADU, and I'm just doing this for the profit. But,
right.
Yeah.
No, I mean, that's, but I think anytime there's somebody who owns the unit on site, there's just a little more control. But they have been sold separately, so you can do that too. Yeah. So that's just kind of a challenge from our end, just to make sure that we approve it so that when it does get sold, it's still legal. It hasn't been expanded. They're not using a garage or something like that. So
enforcing
it's a challenge.
Always a challenge. All right, I think you already. I was going to ask how big can an ADU be, but I kind of get that. We just talked about that. So let's talk a little bit more about the zoning setbacks for the ADU. I know you kind of mentioned that, but I just want to hone in on that a little bit more, because I know I've had people come to me and say, geez, this thing got built and it's awful darn close to my property line. So let's just go over again what the setbacks
no,
are.
I get those calls.
I'm sure you do.
I mean, they can be pretty close to a side or rear property line. They're allowed in your side or rear yard. They're not allowed in the front yard setback in the borough, but you could be in what looks like a front yard, but it's not the front yard setback. So, but as far as the side and rear yard, which is where they're permitted, you could be as close as 5 feet and 20 feet tall, but it's limited to 1.5 stories. If you get larger than that, if you become 2 stories, then you have to go with the setbacks of the main house, which in the township, it's typically a 15-foot side yard setback. In the borough, it ranges from a minimum of 8 to like 10, or, there's combined side yards there.
Right.
But it can be close, and it can be shocking when somebody starts to build one. But, I always advise neighbors. Would make my job and probably the elected officials' job a lot easier if they talk to their neighbors before they build a project. Even a new house, it just gets people like, change is hard to take, and you live right next to it, so you're going to experience it for 4 to 6 months, and
so when somebody goes to add an ADU onto their property, do they have to do the notice everybody within the 200 feet of the edge of the property line, or that's not, because it's allowable?
It's an as of right application. So,
wow. Okay. So it could just pop up, and you'd, as a neighbor, you would have no idea until they're building something.
You see the bulldozer in there and they start excavating.
So be nice to your neighbors and let them know ahead of time. Okay. Let me just change direction here a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
So Derek, how long have you been the town's zoning officer?
I started in Princeton Borough, former Princeton Borough, 2001, and I was the assistant zoning officer, assistant historic preservation officer, assistant affordable housing officer. And then Frank Slimak retired in 2007, and I was appointed the zoning officer then, and the town merged, and I've been here, luckily ever since. It's been a great town. It's been a great experience, and if if you work in municipal government, it's a great place to be.
Yeah. No, thank you. Yeah, we try to make it that way, and we're very lucky to have had you here.
And it's the people you meet in Princeton, aside from the staff, the elected officials, just the people that live here, the variety of
it's amazing
folks, and you're blessed. It's been great.
Yeah, so, luckily there's still a lot of diversity in town, and people from all over the world and all kinds of backgrounds are here.
Yeah, it's really a fantastic place.
So, okay, you're in 8th grade. Did you say, "Gee, someday I want to be a zoning officer," or how did this happen?
Well, I had gone to college, got a business degree, and I was working in commercial lending and residential lending, and it was during the 80s, when the financial crisis hit. So I can remember sitting in my office when that 1987 stock market crashed, and from then on, I was just kind of at a bank for a year, and then they went out of business, and I got sick of that, and I started doing real estate appraising, commercial and residential, and I did that for a while, but I had also got my tax assessor's certification, and I worked with Carol Caskey, former tax assessor in the borough and the township, and I was looking to get into that, and the zoning officer job or assistant came available, and I was looking for a career change. I wanted some stability, and the appraisal business is just, you work 24 hours a day, and nobody's ever happy. You're never high enough for the value. So it just worked out, and Frank Slimek was a great mentor, and it was fun. It's been a great ride. Yeah, I'm very happy.
Yeah, no, I remember Frank and Carol. Yeah, we've had a lot of good people come through the two former towns and the current town as far as working here. It's we've been blessed with great people here. Where'd you grow up? Did you grow up in this area, or?
I was born in the Midwest, and we moved here. My dad was a chemist for Mobil Oil, and I was born in Ames, Iowa. He was at the University of Iowa getting his PhD, and we had moved. He got transferred to Mobil when he got out of college, and we lived in Yardley for a year. And then we moved to Hopewell when I was about 5, and I've lived there till I went away to school. I went to school in Virginia, George Mason, and then I moved back here in probably late 80s.
Okay, all right. So you've been here long enough to be a local.
Yeah.
I
love this area. It's great.
It's a great area. It is. So one thing I want to point out, because you have mentioned former borough, former township a few times, and I guess for people listening is the new Princeton, the 11-year-old or 12-year-old Princeton. Yeah, right. Sorry, 12. Oh, I've lost my count there for a second. Hasn't fully taken the former ordinances from the two former towns and created a new combined set of ordinances. So when you do your job, and when people are looking to build an ADU or the architect's working with them, they have to be very cognizant of, geez, is this in the former borough or the former township? Because the rules are different.
That's correct. Yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, the code will be harmonized someday. It's an enormous task, and I think we're leaning towards a consultant to do it. And but it'll be I think that's the best way to do it. I mean, you need to really. It's not something you can nip around the edges. It should be a new code, and we should look at the master plan suggestions, which I think, I've been here almost 24 years, and this was the most robust master plan examination we've ever had. And I think, Justin Lesko did a great job, and the town did a great job. They had a lot of support from elected officials, and it's been a great thing. So I think, that's the plan. That's the roadmap. Follow that. And but it is confusing for people. There are two R2s. There's an R2B borough and an R2T township. And the R2B borough is a 10,000 square foot lot area, and the R2T township is like an acre and a half. So they're different. I get guys, who want to do it themselves. A lot of people don't want to hire an architect or an engineer. They want to do as much legwork, and they come in with an application it was a former R1 zone in the borough, which is a 20,000 square foot lot area, a little less than a half acre. But the property was in the township, and it was like a, 2 acre requirement. Yeah. So, that happens sometimes. But I mean, it's as clear as it can be until we consolidate now. But it's a headache for people.
Yeah.
And staff. But.
Yeah. Well, I guess the good news, as you said, is the town is getting close to putting an RFP out to people that are qualified to come in and say, okay, we can create your new zoning code.
And I mean, we've really looked at it, so we know where the areas are that need to be changed. It's just, you almost need a fresh set of eyes to go through it and look at zones. Like if you have a cluster of, a tenth of an acre lots in a half an acre zone, maybe that area should be rezoned to something that fits those lots. So
right.
When the town was consolidated, it was just harmonized, don't change, but that's not going to work.
No.
We if you have mistakes, let's fix them. It may take a year or two to do it, but it'll be done right. And eventually the town will be able to, grow in a more smooth pattern and have less confusion with development. And,
yeah. It's one of those things. It's like you need to look at some things long-term and harmonizing that code and getting that code to where it should be. In the long term, just makes so much sense. And in the long term, well, everyone will benefit from it.
Yeah.
It's just going to be a little painful going through it.
It is. I mean, they did as much as they could. Like when Lee Sola was here, he did the site plan and subdivision stuff, which basically follows the municipal land use law. So he had done that. But to actually get into all the zones is a challenging task. So I'm excited that we're moving forward with an RFP on that.
It's a good thing.
It is.
Okay. Let me get back to ADUs. I guess that is our topic of the day. But so, and again, I know that if people have been listening closely, some of the questions I'm asking, you might have caught the answer before. But again, I want to be real clear on the ADUs because we get so many questions about them. So can an ADU be built anywhere in town?
Any residential zone.
Yeah. Okay. See, that's important.
And it's only if you have a single family house. So a lot of people have a 2-family and they want to do an ADU, or a 3-family and they may have area on their lot, but it's only permitted as an accessory use to a single family or, the principal dwelling.
Yeah.
So, but they can be built anywhere in town, subject to the zoning on the lot. You need to meet the impervious coverage, the FAR.
Yeah.
Obviously, there are different setbacks for the ADUs that are a little more lenient than for the main house, but
yeah. Okay. So let me ask you another kind of detailed question. I want to build an ADU on my property. Does my property have to be is there like a minimum size that if you're below a certain size, you just can't do it?
No. You can, let's say your requirement is 20,000 square feet and you have 15,000 square foot lot, as long as the ADU complies with the bulk requirements for the ADU and the FAR and the impervious coverage on the lot, you're allowed to build it.
Huh.
So the impervious coverage, that's a hot topic here with climate change and the flooding that we've had in the last 5 years, 10 years. If you add more than 400 square feet of net new impervious coverage, then you have to, institute a stormwater management system, which is typically a rain garden. So, that's another added cost that can, add the project up. But sometimes people have an existing garage. They tear that down. You get credit for the existing impervious because it's net new. So, you can build something and not have to do stormwater. But
right. Wow. Okay. There's a lot to this. So it makes sense to have a professional help you figure this out.
It does. I mean, it's like you could see the smart students when they come in and the ones that are going to struggle,
Yeah.
And it's like it pays to hire a professional architect or especially architect, and you need an engineer, because the height is based on the average grade, and so you need an engineer to figure that out. And I don't know if we discussed it earlier, but the height for a 1.5 story with a 5-foot setback is 20 feet, and that's measured to the peak. And then it's 25 feet for a 2-story ADU, and that has to be within the setbacks of the main house. So the 25-foot structure cannot be right up against the property line. It's got to be setback, whatever the setback is for the main house.
Right.
And that makes sense because, if it's 1.5 stories and 20 feet, you only have the peak at the 20 feet, and then you have a half story. But if you have a 25-foot 2-story, then you have like a solid wall that could be, 25 feet high.
Yeah. So what, just so people understand, so when we say a 1.5 story structure,
a 1.5 story would be where the floor area ratio, or the floor area of the half structure is 50% of the floor below. So if your floor below is 800 square feet, theoretically you could could have 400 square feet above it.
Right.
And there's an attic definition. Attic, it's basically the area that's higher than 5 feet as measured from floor to rafter, and in excess of 1/3 of the floor below becomes FAR. So if you have a third of the attic area that's 5 feet or higher, but it's less than a third of the floor below, it's exempt from FAR. So that's how you see some ADUs. You think, oh, it looks bigger than 800 square feet. Well, there's an attic credit. It's the same as there is on a single family house.
Right.
They both use the same definition for the floor area ratio.
So that is, I guess, to help. So the attic can't be used as so you can't like sneak in all of a sudden the attic is additional space that you convert.
Right. I mean, we didn't have any restrictions on attics. So when the township had a floor area ratio requirement forever, but they never really talked about attics. And then the borough didn't have one until probably in the mid 2000s. And then they had it. And then the attic was just this big space, and it needs to be controlled too. It's part of the bulk of the house. Yep. So, we needed to regulate that in some way, or at least have a way to address the size of attics, because,
right.
They can get big. But.
Yeah. Right. And I guess there always are sometimes people that want to push the envelope and find whatever way they could tweak things.
It's like the model is water. It'll find the cracks.
They'll find the cracks. There you go. Hey, how about this one? Can an ADU have a basement?
It can have a basement. If you have an egress window, I'm going to count the basement as a habitable room. It doesn't count as FAR, but
okay.
If you have egress windows, I have to assume it's for a reason. It's
right.
not just to have a laundry and a heater down there and storage. So it doesn't count as floor area ratio, but it does count as a habitable room if it's going to be susceptible to habitable space.
Right, right.
And then there's just on the basement thing, if you don't have a basement, if you have a slab, then you get a couple bonuses. They give you up to 100 square feet for a utility room, washer dryer area on the first floor, 48 square feet for a storage area for outdoor, accessible from the outside of the unit for bikes and that kind of stuff to make up for the basement. When, it's like a give and take thing with basements. Basements kind of do have a tendency to increase the water table. So,
right.
We want to encourage crawl spaces and slabs that don't have that similar effect. So.
Yeah. Boy, a lot goes into all of this.
Sometimes too much. But.
Yeah. So now what about parking with an ADU? How do you...
So they're exempt from parking up to 2 habitable rooms, which is typically a living room and a bedroom.
Okay.
But if you have 3, then you have to have 1 parking space. And it would be same setbacks as the main house. It's got to be 25 feet back from the front property line or behind the house, whichever's less. It's 4 feet from a property line, depending on the lot width. So
if you have those 3 rooms, you have to have a parking space that's on the property.
Yeah, and can be ingressed and egressed independently from the main house. So
right. So you're not just throwing your car in the existing driveway.
So you're not parking behind the garage where the main house is and they need to get out. It's not going to work. But
there's no car jockey.
But they still have. I think parking is an amenity that's worth money. So you actually see a lot of parking spaces with the ADU. Just because it makes sense and solves a lot of problems.
Yeah.
It's tough to park on the street. Some places are able to and others aren't. So
yeah, that makes sense. All right, Derek, let me ask you about if there's a garage on the property, because it seems like the garage could stay, the garage could be taken down, but how does if I have a garage, how many different ways does that impact what I may or may not be able to do with that ADU?
That's a good question. People look at garages because it's an already built structure usually, and it's, you could expand it to make it an ADU, you save money. However, I do require, if it's an existing garage, that it meet the setback, which, because it's a garage now.
Yeah.
And it just has cars going in and out of it. And once it has a living family or person in it, it's a different use. So you do need a variance for that. Every variance is an individual thing. So anytime you apply for a variance, I would just recommend that people talk to their neighbors before they come in. So you either know if you have support or opposition. So, but that's that's a nice way to do it. It can save you money, but it's got to meet the ADU setback, which is a minimum of 5 feet, depending on the height.
Right. And that type of variance would go to the zoning board?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So now let's say that I live in a neighborhood that has a lot of small properties, where the houses are fairly close to each other. So how does that impact building an ADU, or how do I do that?
Yeah, we've seen a few creative ones in the John Witherspoon neighborhood, which, as you're aware, has probably, I would say the average lot size is like 30 feet. So the floor area ratio, which is a zoning tool that controls the size of buildings, is a percentage of the lot. So if your lot is 10,000 square feet, the floor area ratio is 25%. You could build a 2,500 square foot house. Then it has certain exemptions built into it. For example, you get up to 200 square feet for open porches, which is a nice design feature. It softens the look of houses. You also get a 300 square foot exemption for accessory structures. Could be a garage, could be a pavilion in your backyard, as long as it's not higher than 15 feet. So I've seen a few in the John Witherspoon neighborhood where they built right less than the 300 square foot. It becomes exempt from FAR. It's a small size. It's not obtrusive. It fills a niche in the rental market in town for either students or, elderly people.
Yeah.
Or it also provides the owner the opportunity. You could even live in that ADU and rent your house, the main house out and get money to stay in town and pay taxes. And so we do see some. Not everybody does the maximum.
Yeah.
The maximum is the minimum, but which is nice. And I think that's the creative thing. Obviously people spend money, and you want to maximize your investment. So I understand why they want to go as big as they can, but sometimes it doesn't work. And the small ones are nice. They're creative, and it's a nice housing, addition to the menu of housing in town.
Yeah.
So
and sometimes I think probably helps you get along better with your neighbors if you haven't created something that the neighborhood that maybe just doesn't fit quite in the neighborhood.
Yeah. No, I mean, anytime a house is built, the neighbors are, it's change, and it's hard to take sometimes, and I mean, I live in Hopewell. We had a couple houses built on our street, and it's just, after 6 months, all right, come on, it's all right, but you got to finish up,
Get done. Earlier you had mentioned rain garden, or you might need to put a rain garden in. So just to help people listening, can you explain what is a rain garden and what's it supposed to do?
It's a method to collect stormwater in the event of storms, and they're engineered to certain flood, like 100-year storm is the max, I think, in Princeton. And it's a depressed area filled with bioretention material that has water-resistant plants, and it's designed to take the drainage from the house into this, engineered for size to accept the amount of runoff on the site. And the idea is that the rain water goes into this depressed area and it infiltrates back into the ground and cleans the water, treats it at the same time as it hopefully stops the overflow onto neighbors' properties.
Right.
So it's been quite an active part of the town for the last 10 years. Just, we've had storms like you couldn't imagine.
Yes.
Ida, and then the one in 2018, I think it rained like 6 inches here.
Yeah.
And I lived in Hopewell. I looked over here, the sky was black. I said, what's going on over there? I mean, Nassau Street was flooded, Witherspoon was. So it's an important thing, and it's a good thing. And we don't allow, dry wells. Like, that used to be the preferred method, but what we found is that dry wells get, eventually they stop functioning as a dry well. They just get clogged up with material and silt, and the rain gardens seem to be a better option. So you see them all over. I mean, they look like gardens. Sometimes they're in the front yard and they have nice plantings.
Right.
And,
Yeah. I mean, they can be pretty attractive.
Yeah.
I mean, not everybody needs to have a lawn or big sidewalk or whatever on their property. It's something to help absorb the water, and the runoff is important.
And then, you have a built environment, so you're kind of playing catch up anyway. And, the houses that were built 50 years ago, the rain spouts just went down on the ground and water went where it went, know. So now it's all connected to a system that leads it to a dry well, and I'm not a dry well, but a rain garden. And it treats it better than it did before. So
yeah, pretty important, especially if you're downhill from your adjoining properties, because it's all running towards you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think I'm out of questions, but Derek, thanks for joining us. This has been great.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure, Mayor. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us for the 61st episode of the Princeton Podcast, produced by the podcast production team at HG Media. If you enjoyed this episode of the Princeton Podcast, please share it with your friends. Visit our website at princetonpodcast.com. And be sure to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Audible, or wherever you listen to podcasts.